right, everybody. Welcome. My name is Nancy Siegel. I own Solutions for the Workplace, which is a career strategies and resume writing firm that focuses on the federal government. With me today and always is my partner in crime, Ellen Steverson of Starting Block Career Services. Ellen, you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. I'm Ellen Steverson, founder of Starting Block Career Services, a full service career management firm that specializes in resumes and LinkedIn and coaching. But I concentrate on the private sector or the civilian world, whatever people like to call it, and have been partnering with you, for probably 10 years now, Nancy. We've been colleagues, so excited to be here.
All right. And so Ellen and I have a podcast series. We did a series last year on getting a job. Now we're going to be focusing on bite-sized career strategies to help you manage your career. And our first session today is on what to do your first 90 days on a new job.
Right.
So, Ellen, what do you think they should do and really focus on in their first 90 days? Now, your practice is primarily private sector. Mine is the federal government. And while there is definitely some overlap, there are some differences and distinctions. So, Ellen, take it away. What do you advise people to do on their first 90 days in a new job?
One of the most important things I think people should do when they start a new job is really make sure they understand the role and have a clear understanding of the expectations. And this can come when you first start the job, maybe HR, or when you got hired, you received a job description. However, a lot of times in the civilian world, people don't get a good job description like they probably do in a federal role. So therefore, my advice is make sure you maintain a copy of the job posting. That is a good reference point if you don't have a job description for the first year of your job, to go back and see what were the things they put in that job posting saying they needed help with, and really having great conversations with your boss to make sure that you understand the role and the direction you should be taking, especially the first 90 days. Wouldn't you agree, Nancy?
I do agree. And the federal side, everybody will have a job description because the paperwork that brings you on board and says that you are official actually includes your job description number. So every employee is assigned to what's called on the federal side a position description, or PD. And absolutely, you want a copy of your PD. The other thing that federal employees will get in their first 30 days are what is called performance standards. These are the written expectations for how you would be evaluated. And if you don't get those in your first couple of weeks, please ask your boss for them, because knowing how you're evaluated or will be evaluated is critical, because that will help you focus your attention on the things that matter. And I don't want to get into too much HR geek speak, but on the federal side, employees are actually required to get their performance expectations in their first 30 days of employment.
And that's excellent. And sadly, in a lot of civilian companies, that just doesn't happen. So my recommendation, over the years of coaching people in their first 30 days is when they're feeling like they don't know what to do is, again, it's up to you to have these conversations with your boss sometimes because they're too busy and they don't use a performance type of description, to really take good notes. Make sure you're writing a plan yourself so that you don't feel frustrated. And when you do have conversations with your boss, it's a great starting point to come back to and have as an agenda and an ongoing thing. I mean, there's no rule that says you can't create a job description. And just depending on the size of the company, that could be really seen as a very positive thing. If you work for a medium to small size company with no job descriptions, start writing out a job description, making sure you're having great conversations with your boss, and the relationship and the dynamics with your boss will change to something more positive, and you will feel less frustrated not having a plan.
I think that's great advice. And it's one thing to write that job description, but make sure you check it with your boss
Oh,
to make
absolutely.
sure
Mhm.
that you and your boss have the same ideas of what the job entails.
Right. I'd even go as far as to say not only your boss, but depending on the environment you're working in, you could have multiple reporting people, or you could be on different teams. So just make sure, again, it goes back to knowing the job posting as well and knowing the environment to make sure that your plan isn't just one-sided. And Nancy's absolutely right. And I'll make that clear is that, your plan is to have conversations with people at work to make sure everybody's moving on the same direction and is on the same page.
And I think that's a great segue, Ellen, to the second thing I think people need to focus on during their first 90 days, and that is building relationships.
Absolutely. And I say this all the time. It's your responsibility when you start a new job to make it part of your goal to build relationships. I mean, I know in our dream world, we think we're going to start a new job and everyone's going to rush over and ask us to go to lunch and we're going to make friends, but that doesn't really happen. Everybody's at work is very busy already. So you come in and you're new, you have to take the time to get to know people and really, again, have a good conversation with your boss of who do I need to get to know? Who are my key contacts here? And when he gives you 3 or 4 names over the next week or 2 or 3, really set a calendar date with them, have a cup of coffee with them, try and have a little meeting with them so that you can get to know them. And again, listen and ask great questions. And that's how you learn.
Right. So let's talk about the reality in a lot of workplaces now, and that is people are working remotely. So
Mhm.
you may find yourself in a position where you can't walk down the hall
That's right.
and introduce yourself. And
Mhm.
so let's just take a moment because I know things are opening up, but I think it is going to be very different and maybe not everything is going to open up, or people might be on hybrid schedules, so you might not have the opportunity to really be in the office at the same time your colleagues are. So let's talk just a moment or two about how to get to know people when your relationships are virtual.
That's an excellent point, Nancy. And in today's world, everybody has to develop relationship skills in a virtual world. So, one of the first things I would say is really one, make sure you know how to use the technology. Make sure that you can, share your screen, that you understand how to interact on different platform, whatever platform they're using, Teams, Zoom, Skype, whatever. So you really do want to practice that in the evenings, maybe get some of your family members to help you if you don't know how to use technology. But it's still going to be up to you to reach out to people and make appointments on their calendars if they're using calendars at work. Just, hey, can I get a, 15-minute, 4:30 meetup with you at the end of the day just to get to know you, or whatever time is conducive for them. And it's also going to be just as important to engage in extracurricular activities, let's say. So again, lots of places now that are working virtually have, coffee hour, they might have a virtual game of some sort. Make sure you're participating in them. Make sure you're showing up, especially in the first 90 days. Even if you find them to be silly, a waste of time, you need to show up. You need to
So
participate.
I agree with all of those things. One thing that I see in my work is that people don't turn on their cameras. And
Okay.
I think that in this virtual world, it is critical that you turn on your camera.
Right, I agree. And I also think it's critical to make sure that you are looking presentable. I've just
Also
been,
true.
I have been appalled at some of the meetings I've been asked to attend and presentations, and people literally look like they just rolled out of bed and put a sweatshirt on. And I get we're all living more casual, but the first 90 days work, even if everyone else is doing that, I really recommend you stay professional.
I just had that conversation with a colleague earlier this week. She had a meeting with a client, and the client looked like they rolled out of bed. And
Mhm,
she was still huffing and puffing about it 3 days later.
mhm.
But cameras are so important. It's
I
really
agree.
important to be thinking about that. Make sure that what is behind you is presentable, or use one of the backgrounds that is provided. But humans like human faces. I mean,
Absolutely.
we're drawn to it.
Mhm,
And so, especially when you're new and people don't know you,
mhm.
you have to go out of your way. And if who you're working with doesn't turn on their camera, ask them to. Pretty simple.
Remember to smile. I know that sounds like such silly advice, but when I teach sales and teach people how to do all this, I say put a mirror on your desk, even if you're not looking in the mirror because you're looking in the camera. Again, just seeing that mirror on your desk will remind you to smile. And you do want to be smiling. Even though we're living in a virtual world, you really still want to use same common sense you would if you were meeting somebody at the water cooler. You want to look good. You want to look like you're engaging and you're ready. You're nodding, leaning a little forward into the camera, that type of stuff.
Right. So building relationships is critical. How can we make ourselves part of the team? That's another key piece, because we all work collegiately and collaboratively. And when you're new, it's kind of hard to become part of the teams. Do you have some thoughts on that, Ellen?
Well, one of the things I would say is when you're starting your job and have some time and you're in these meetings, really take the attitude of, I'm happy to help people. When you have the attitude of, I'm happy to help, and not the attitude of, well, this isn't my job, I don't get paid to do this, the team bonding becomes much quicker. So, at the end of the meetings, when you're new, you could always say, hey, I notice I have some extra time this week. Can I help anyone? Or hey, just so you know, I'm really great at Excel spreadsheets. I noticed we're talking about Excel spreadsheets. You want me to whip one up and put some formulas in it or something like that. So again, offering, extending yourself and really participating. Don't be afraid to participate and take on a little bit something extra so that you get to know the team.
And what you do it well.
Oh, absolutely.
Establish a reputation for being reliable, for doing quality work, for making sure that that work is presented on time, and that work that you produce is consistent with the larger culture. If there are style guides in your organization, make sure you have a copy of them so you can follow it. If the culture is long paragraphs, use long paragraphs. If the culture is bullets, use bullets. You know, we all have two ears and one mouth for a reason. Listen more than you talk.
Mhm.
And I think making yourself an important team member is a great way to start, and learning the culture. And that can be hard. So what do you think about learning the culture, Ellen? Are there some things that you have found worked for your clients?
Well, one of the things that a lot of hiring managers talk to me about when they're hiring people and what they want is kind of a cultural thing that I think more and more people need to be aware of. And that is, like we were just talking about, participating in these teams and everything comes down to a cultural thing. And again, you really want to make sure, especially if you're receiving emails and things like that, that when you respond, you go back through the original email and make sure you're answering and addressing everything they're asking for. I hear a lot of managers complaining about how team engagement can be very hard when people are not fully communicating in these emails and virtual worlds. So again, if your boss asks you for 3 things, when you return that email, double check that you've given them 3 separate responses to the 3 things they're wanting. And it boils down to, if it's a culture where they're sending you emails or communications and they're expecting responses, you really want to make sure you're fitting into the culture and responding and all that. I think with the culture too, you have to be very aware, look and see what they're doing. And if they are supporting an organization, or if they run a race, or they do extra, and of course, this is if you're on site, but you want to make sure that you kind of find time and participate again. Part of being in the culture is contributing and participating. But I'd also say one of the things about a culture is, we all go to work thinking we're going to have these great dynamic relationships, and you get there and find there's a negative Nelly. And every time you're around negative Nelly, all she does is say terrible things. Those are the people that you really do want to kind of shy away from hanging out with it for long periods of time, because even if you're not being the negative Nelly, if other people see you constantly chatting with this person, they could assume that you're being just as negative. So be very aware not to agree with the negative Nelly, not to say, oh, I just noticed the same thing you told me yesterday, because now you're going down the wrong lane and you don't want to be in that lane at all.
Let me pick up on something you said that I think is really critical. And you mentioned communication, which of course is the basis of all of this, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Some organizations want face-to-face conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Some organizations want email.
Mm-hmm.
Some organizations are big on the telephone. Some communicate by text. And so I think a great thing to really be thinking about when you are starting a new job is to figure out how people communicate.
Absolutely.
That's fundamental, because
And that's part of the culture. Right.
it is absolutely the culture.
Right.
And so observe. And if you're not sure, boss woman, I've been here a couple of weeks. I've seen some people communicate via email. I see some people pick up the phone. Boss, what would you prefer? How can I best support you? Would you prefer that I talk to you face to face? Would you rather I send an email? Are there particular issues that you want to make sure we discuss? Or do I have the authority to make decisions? That's also part of the culture.
That's right. And then another part of that is also having conversation with your boss on what happens when you need information from, and I'm just thinking of an accounting person recently started a job, and they were telling me that they were struggling. They called for coaching because they're required to reach out to these people via email, but nobody was responding back because nobody knew who this person really was or anything. So again, sometimes you have to go back to your boss, which is what I recommended. Go back to your boss and say, I'm following up with these people, but they're not responding. What is my next step? So that you understand the next step. And this boss was like, you pick up the phone and call them and tell them who you are and that you report to me, and this is what needs to get done, which was a little nerve-wracking for this person. But once they started doing it, they got quite good at it and started getting good information because they started building relationships with those people and they knew who he was. So sometimes that anxiety and that nervousness, you just have to plow through it with your boss's help and ask good questions, because communications is 2 ways.
And some bosses might have responded differently with, oh, you know what? It would be helpful if I, as the boss, sent an email out introducing you. My bad. I'm sorry, which is another possible outcome.
That's right. That's right.
And that whole piece about establishing a relationship, a communication, understanding the style and how the organization works,
Mhm.
critical.
Absolutely. And I want to mention briefly, I was telling you earlier, Nancy, I had a young girl start a job and she just because they allowed them to wear earbuds at work. And she just kept putting the earbuds in and doing her job. But in reality, when the boss called her in, he was saying, you're not building enough relationships because when you put those earbuds in, you're pretty much saying to everybody, stay away from me.
Mhm.
So even though the company might allow something, your first, 30, 60, 90 days, be very aware of how critical all of this relationship, communications, culture is so important to get it solidified so you can be successful all year.
Right. And I think the last point that's so important to discuss now, because we've talked about understanding the job and having a job description and building those relationships and participating and making yourself an integral part of the team. And the last piece here, I think that people need to remember to do is to solicit feedback. Don't
Mhm.
assume that no feedback means everything is fine. Actively seek out your boss's views of how those first 90 days are going. Now, if you're a federal employee, there should be formal mechanisms in place for check-ins quarterly, but those things don't always happen. So make an appointment, tell your boss, you'd like to discuss the first 90 days so that you have an opportunity to make any necessary course corrections before you get too far along and it's almost too late. How does that work on the private sector side?
No, I totally agree with you, Nancy. Again, I think most people really just assume if nobody's saying anything that everything's good. And that is
You
not
know
the
what they
case.
say about assumptions.
That's right. So we do not want to assume anything. And of course, one of the things about this podcast is we're giving you different scenarios, but you really have to know your job description as well. So again, if you know you're in sales and you need to hit certain metrics and you're not hitting them, you need to have conversations sooner than 90 days. Overall, I think we should all get comfortable saying to somebody, how am I doing? This is what I've been doing this last 4 weeks. Do you want me to concentrate on this for the next 4 weeks, or where else should, like Nancy said, course correct? And really start getting just in the habit of asking, finding your way to be comfortable to ask the boss those type of questions. And I'll also say, really make sure you're being observant of when your boss likes to be talked to. So if you know your boss comes in Monday morning and he doesn't feel like talking, Monday morning wouldn't be the day you'd pick to have that conversation. Asking for feedback is critical, but you don't have to say it in such a way like, hey, I need feedback. This is going to be an evaluation, so that they feel like they're getting extra work. You want to make it a natural occurrence and that it's going to be an ongoing thing that you ask so that you can stay focused and hit your success goals and your wins.
Right. And there's no reason that you can't be successful if you follow these 5 ideas that we've talked about
Mhm.
during your first 90 days. So I want to thank Ellen Steverson, Starting Block Career Services. Again, I'm Nancy Siegel, Solutions for the Workplace. We hope this was helpful. Please connect with us on LinkedIn.
Yes, and stay tuned because we ended with talking about wins and success. And next podcast, we are going to talk more about tracking your success and preparing for evaluations, which again, evaluations can happen at any time, but also annually. So we will help you stay prepared for that.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please visit Nancy or Ellen's website for additional information about our services, a free tip sheet which highlights our discussion today, and be sure to tune in to our next podcast, which will be posted soon. Thank you.